Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the tech specs of the Inergy Flex. The last video I made, I was joking around a lot. The goal of that video was to try to appeal to a wider audience of people who aren't too tech savvy when it comes to solar generators. So I thought I would just do a deep dive into the tech specs in this video. So as you know, this is a modular power system. If you haven't watched my first video yet, maybe go and watch that one because I give an overview of what this generator is all about. In terms of what it can do, okay, it's a 1500 watt continuous output pure sine wave inverter, and that is 1500 watts continuous, unlike its predecessor, the Apex, which was capped at 650 watts output. This one is 1500 watts, so you can crank it all the way until the battery or the batteries, if you have many other batteries underneath, because remember this is modular, you can add up to 96 batteries. You can run that sucker until the wheels fall off. But bear in mind, in doing that rapid discharge of any battery, it is going to have implications for the battery's longevity. So it might mean the difference between 500 recharge cycles to 80% of its stated capacity to 2,000 cycles. Okay, ideally Inergy suggests not doing that, obviously, which is why they capped the last one at 650. So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that there's an optimal range to this. It's kind of like, you know, when you're driving a vehicle, if you're revving it, if you're driving 200 miles an hour, you're going to get way poorer gas mileage unless you drive like 90. I think that's the sweet spot. So there's going to be a sweet spot to run this thing to get the most amount of recharge cycles. Now the battery will auto shut off at 20% of its stated capacity. It'll run below that. It'll show you that you have capacity on there still. Like, it'll run till it gets to 0%, but the battery itself is not depleting past 20%. And that's just to, once again, prolong the lifespan of the battery. That does mean, I'm assuming now, that you're not getting the entire 1 kilowatt of battery power out of the actual battery, 1 kilowatt hours of battery power. But again, don't quote me on that. That's something Inergy might need to come on in and clarify for us. So you can get the 1500 watt power console, or you can get the DC version of that. So if you're only using DC devices, once again, if you're like a off-grid person, or you live, out of your vehicle or something like that, one of these people who's traveling, one of these nomads, then you can get the DC version. Both are going to have output ports that are going to have the 30 amp DC regulated power at 13.8 volts. And that's going to be beneficial because that means you're going to be able to run your electronics all the way down to the depletion of your battery if they are DC powered. With the DC, however, you just get more DC outputs instead of having all these AC outputs. Myself personally, I'm content having the AC and the DC, and I think for most people, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that that's the case for you too. Now, in terms of the Flex MPPT supercharger, that's going to allow you to triple the standard input of the Flex. So right now you can input, I believe, 400 watts with your solar panels, which is going to allow you to charge that 1 kilowatt hour battery in about 3.5 hours. Now, if you buy 2 extra batteries, say, so you have 3 batteries on here, now you're talking about 3 kilowatt hours. So that means that if you have 400 watts, and we're assuming that you're getting optimal sunlight, you have 400 watts of panels, you're probably going to be getting, realistically, we'll say conservatively, 300 watts out of those panels. It's going to take you 10 hours to charge the whole stack of batteries. Now, if you have an MPPT supercharger on here, then you can possibly charge that faster depending on how more panels you have. Okay, so you can use that supercharger, but you're going to want more solar panels. There's no sense in having the supercharger if you don't plan on having more solar power than 400 watts. They say that storing, if you're not planning on using this, if you're just getting this for an emergency, then they suggest storing it at half mass, basically storing it at half capacity. You don't want to store it at full voltage. You want to store it at half, and you don't want to store it too low, because then you run the risk of the battery fully depleting, and that can just have degradational effects on the lifespan of the battery. So if you are going to put this in storage, store it to 50%, pull it out periodically, month to month, just run a test, turn it on basically, and see how much power is in there. Try to keep it balanced at around 50%. Now there is a 10-year prorated plan with this, and what that means is that basically they're going to warranty the battery for up to 10 years for the people who've done pre-orders, and that means that you are going to get the amount of years back off of that 10 years that you haven't used. So let's say you use it for 5 years and the battery goes kaput for whatever reason, then they're going to prorate 5 years. So you're going to get 5 years worth of battery basically towards either your next purchase or just in a refund or whatever arrangement you make with them. And that's all under the condition that you're using it as specified by the manufacturer. That is, not exceeding 1500 watts, I'm assuming, for prolonged periods of time, not leaving the thing basically not charged, leaving it at zero charge for years on end, or leaving it out in the hot sun or something like that. How they're going to determine that, I don't know. I guess there's probably diagnostic ways to look at, you know, basically the state of the battery and determine how the battery has been used. But again, don't quote me on that. So lithium uses nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide batteries for this, and I think there's been some criticism for why they have chosen that particular battery type, so I'm just going to read you their explanation. And other chemistries like lithium iron phosphate or lead acid are much heavier, much larger, and in the case of LFP, more expensive. So lithium phosphate does have its advantages, especially in permanent DIY installations or being used to power RVs, but they're not ideal for portable solutions. So that's the name of the game here, is portability. You can use this in your house and you can take it, you know, camping on the weekend. You can just maneuver it around, and it's going to be as portable as you decide, because it is modular. So you can move the individual components together or separately. Lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide offers the highest power density with the Flex battery's most advanced safety features. So they're really big on safety here, and I don't blame them, okay? You know, whenever you're in this kind of industry, liability is a big issue, so they want to make this unit as safe as possible, and that is the lithium battery chemistry that they've chosen to be the most safe. I personally don't know a whole lot about that world of things, but I'm just giving you their explanation. It's lighter and more compact than other battery chemistries without sacrificing safety. Now there is pass-through charging, meaning that yes, you can be charging it via solar and discharging the battery at the same time. And you will notice right now we are charging this fridge, powering this fridge, and there's going to be a net amount. So if I was charging this at the same time, there would be a net amount of charge gained or lost indicated on the LED screen here. So basically it tells you how much power is being discharged, and it tells you how much power is being inputted. It subtracts one from the other, and that basically tells you, you know, whether you're at a net gain or a net loss. So if you're running a 1500 watt device and you're only taking 1000 watts in from the sun, then of course you're going to be losing battery capacity over time. So it's up to you to ration it and make sure that you are going to be able to sustain your critical appliances like your fridge, things like that, and not exhausting your power on those more optional devices. Now they do use ECA8 connectors on here. They're compact. There's no tools required to disconnect. I really personally like them. They go in really easy, and there's no fumbling around. It's very straightforward. You can shrink or heat shrink them with that plastic if you want to waterproof them. But again, this is not necessarily for a permanent installation, although you could easily adapt this to have it in a permanent installation. So you can permanently install the solar and then just have the cord that's running, or the EC8 that's running into your Kodiak. If you decided, you don't want this thing sitting outside all winter and you take this inside, but you're okay with the panels being outside, then you can do that. Okay, so there's lots of options there. You can use panels from multiple manufacturers. In fact, I have multiple panels that I've used at the same time on this. I've used the Power Foam and the Inergy links concurrently to double up my power with no issues whatsoever. As long as you're not exceeding the 90 volt input threshold, then you're going to be fine. Now, Inergy does recommend that you charge it with solar cells that are wired in parallel and not in a series. With monocrystalline or polycrystalline panels, if something is wired in a series, the weakest link basically dictates the output power. Whereas if you wire them in parallel, you're going to get a compounding effect of the power that's generated. So if one panel, and they're wired in a series, is only outputting 10% because part of it is covered by a tree branch or something like that, that's going to dictate the output of the total system. So they recommend wiring it in parallel up to 90 volts. Now, in terms of the actual capabilities of the system that I've tested so far, I've pushed it to 2,000 watts for well over a minute. And so the inverter is capable of a 3,000 watt surge. Now, it's rated for 1,500 watts continuous. That doesn't mean that it can't exceed that, but it's not going to be able to sustain 2,000 watts long term. But what that shows me is that it may be able to power some power tools, which might require a little bit more power for slightly over that 1,500 watts, but you can't expect that continuously, and that's likely not good for your battery at all. And something like that may be one of those things that you get into trouble with if you're looking at a battery warranty. But again, don't quote me on that. This is just based on my personal experience. So far, this is working for me just like the Apex. It's basically the exact same brains and functionality as the Apex. I think it's the same MPP charge controller in there too. And just the interface, the ease of use, and the reliability is exactly like the Apex. And I love that because of all the generators I've used, the Apex gets the most use from me, and it is the most reliable. Right now we're powering this fridge. It'll power this fridge for around 20 hours with one flex battery. Now, if I had a solar panel on here and I was getting a moderate amount of sun, I could possibly run this indefinitely, okay? And also have, some other power to play with, because the fridge only takes about 150 to 200 watts maximum at any given time. So that means that you still do have 1,300 watts of wiggle room. You could hook up a TV to this, or phone or whatever, but this is not meant to be a whole home or even whole RV solution necessarily. Usually when you're living in a mobile home, or if you're camping, you're scaling back your power needs quite a bit. But there are certainly going to be limitations to a system like this, and that's just something you're going to have to keep in mind. Now, one of the great things about a system like this, though, is the interchangeability. Say you did want to buy another head unit, or you wanted to buy a DC and an AC head unit, then you could do that. And you could have both using the same batteries. If you get an MPP supercharger, you can actually charge 1 or 2 or 3 of your batteries independent of having to have the whole unit together with the head unit. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have 4 batteries, okay, and then you have one supercharge MPPT charge controller, and you have, of course, the AC head unit. Well, what you could do in that situation, if you didn't want to, let's say you wanted to charge the batteries in a certain place, but you wanted to take this unit. Let's say you're on a farm and you want to go out into the barn and you need some power out there, but you want to keep your solar array is not at the barn, or whatever the case might be. Maybe it's at the house. So you could have those batteries powering up for you back home while you take the entire unit out to the barn to do your work, whatever you need to do, you know, on a day trip or whatever the case might be, and come back and still have those batteries. So I like how you can break up the components of the system, charge them individually, interchange them. So if you wanted, you know, 2 head units, one for the barn, one for the house, and just to have that interchangeability, I think is really, really awesome. And the option for future upgradability and to the best of our ability escaping that planned obsolescence model, I think is pretty stellar. And that's one of the main selling points with a unit like this, is your ability to upgrade it and not having to eat a loss every time you upgrade your system, because you have to dispose of perfectly good working components of that system because they are now either obsolete or they just can't integrate into the new system. As I indicated previously, obviously I'm not a huge fan of the aesthetic of it, but at the same time, it doesn't look bad. I will say that in terms of practicality, the shape of it does make sense. It's just a rectangle. It's not some strange, obtuse style shape that's going to be hard to fit somewhere. I think it's perfect if you do have limited space in a vehicle, and so you kind of know what you're getting. I think the dimensions are 14 by, what are they, 14 by 8. Let me just see here, 14 by 8 by 9.4 inches for this. Now, if you were to add more stacks, you're adding more height. Okay, the width and the depth are going to remain the same, but the height is going to change. I think there's definitely ways this could be improved. A lot of people have recommended some sort of base plate that you could mount this on, and I do think the feet of it could use improvement. I think there could be a bit more rubber in certain places just to minimize, you know, scratching of surfaces, and just to maybe keep it a bit more stable so it's not sliding around on whatever platform you have it on. There are rubber feet, which mine came off for me, so that's not good. But mind you, this is not a final production unit. There are going to be some differences made by the time it comes out. And I also think that the latches that latch it into place could be just a little bit stronger, and locking. I think that would be good. Not that I think you're going to be swinging this thing around all over the place, but it would be nice if those latches were just a little bit stronger and more snug. Other than that, I would say that I'm glad that they added these protective covers to the DC ports. That was a suggestion I had to them last time, and it looks like they followed up on that. I like that you can individually see the power of each battery by simply pushing that button. And so that's going to be really convenient if you do start to get multiple batteries. You're going to want that functionality in order to know, you know, exactly what each battery is at. And the ability to read the solar input is a very, very cool feature. You really do need that on one of these nowadays, so you know how to optimize the placement of your solar panels to get the most sunlight. So I'm really impressed with the unit so far. I've done some testing using the heat gun, using some major appliances, using some low power drain DC appliances. My only criticism of the low power drain DC appliances is, my problem with that is this. You can power something like this, and it's going to take 1500 watts, but it's going to bring this amount of water to a boil in 90 seconds. Or you can power the same thing using one of their DC appliances, and it's going to take 10-15 minutes. So are you really saving power in the long run? No, you aren't. But what that's going to allow you to do is run more devices concurrently, and it's also going to allow you to prolong the lifespan of your battery. Because remember, if you're depleting 1500 watts continuously all the time, that's going to be bad for the battery. So the DC allows you to output lower loads, but just over a longer period of time to achieve the same result. So if you're a person who doesn't mind waiting 15 minutes for a hot cup of tea in the morning, or maybe not 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Depends on how much water you put in your portable DC kettle or whatever you have. And they're going to be different. They're going to vary from one to another. But I think most of them run around 120 watt hours because they're 12 volts, usually 10 amp devices. Something to keep in mind anyways. But let me know what you guys think about the Inergy Flex in the comment section below, and let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully one of the Energy nerds will stop in here and answer those questions for you. Thanks a lot, guys. Canadian Prepper out.